The rain battered the old pickup truck, its wipers squeaking against the windshield as Henry Grayson gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the cracked leather. His eyes, red-rimmed and weary, darted to the rearview mirror, where he caught a glimpse of himself 72 years old, gray stubble creeping across his jaw, lines etched deep from years of grief and solitude. He wasn't supposed to be here, parked in the alley behind the thrift store on Maple Street, watching the back door like some kind of private eye from a grainy old movie. But there he was, heart-thumping, following her. His maid, Clara. She'd worked for him for 3 years, quiet, efficient, always slipping out of his creaky Victorian home on the edge of town before he could ask too many questions. Tonight, though, something had tugged at him. Maybe it was the way she'd lingered by the kitchen counter that morning, her hands trembling as she polished the silverware, her eyes distant, like she was carrying a weight too heavy for her slight frame. Or maybe it was the worn-out coat she always wore, too thin for the biting November cold. Whatever it was, Henry had to know. So, when she left his house at dusk, he'd grabbed his keys and followed. The alley smelled of damp asphalt and stale coffee from the diner across the street. Henry's breath fogged the window as he squinted through the rain. Clara emerged from the thrift store's back door, her figure small against the flickering neon sign. She wasn't carrying the usual bag of cleaning supplies or the faded tote she brought to work. Instead, she clutched a cardboard box, taped shut, her arms wrapped around it like it was something precious. Henry's brow furrowed. Why the thrift store? Why after hours? She glanced over her shoulder, her scarf slipping to reveal a strand of graying hair, and then she hurried down the alley, her steps quick and uneven. Henry's fingers twitched on the gear shift. He shouldn't be doing this. It was wrong, invasive, but Clara, she was a mystery, one he hadn't realized he cared about until now. He eased the truck forward, keeping his distance, the rain masking the rumble of his engine. Clara turned onto Elm Street, her boots splashing through puddles as she headed toward the old community center, its brick facade chipped and faded. Henry parked a block away, his heart heavy with guilt but heavier with curiosity. He pulled his wool cap low and stepped into the rain, his bad knee aching with every step. The community center's windows glowed faintly, and through the smudged glass, he saw shadows moving people, maybe a dozen, gathered in a circle. Clara slipped inside, the box still in her arms. Henry hesitated, his breath catching. He wasn't a busybody, never had been. After his wife, Margaret, passed 5 years ago, he'd kept to himself, letting the world blur into the background. But Clara, she'd been a quiet presence in his life, dusting the shelves where Margaret's knickknacks still sat, brewing coffee just the way he liked it, never asking for anything in return. And now here he was, spying on her like some fool. He crept closer, peering through the window. Inside, Clara set the box on a folding table, her movements careful, almost reverent. The group, mostly older folks, some with canes, others in worn coats, watched her with quiet anticipation. Henry's eyes narrowed. Was this some kind of meeting? A support group? Clara opened the box, and Henry caught a glimpse of its contents: neatly folded clothes, scarves, mittens, and what looked like small packets of food canned goods, maybe, or granola bars. She began handing them out, her voice too soft to hear through the glass, but her smile was unmistakable. It was small, tired, but warm, like a candle flickering in a storm. An elderly man with a limp took a scarf, his hands shaking as he wrapped it around his neck. A woman with a patched jacket clutched a can of soup, her eyes glistening. Henry's throat tightened. Clara wasn't just giving them things, she was giving them dignity, warmth, a moment of care in a world that had forgotten them. Henry stepped back, the rain soaking through his coat. He felt like an intruder, his cheeks burning despite the cold. Clara wasn't just his maid, she was, what? A saint? A secret do-gooder? He limped back to his truck, his mind spinning. All this time, he thought of her as the woman who cleaned his house, who moved through his life like a shadow, but she was out here, in the rain, giving what little she had to others. He sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling, and stared at the community center's glowing windows. He thought of Margaret, how she'd always left $1 or $2 in the church collection plate, even when they were scraping by. Kindness doesn't cost much, she'd say, her voice soft as a hymn. Henry's chest ached. He hadn't been kind, not really. He'd been too wrapped up in his own loneliness to notice anyone else's. The next morning, Clara arrived at Henry's house as usual, her coat damp from the walk, her face pale but composed. She set her tote by the door and started wiping down the kitchen counters, the same routine as always. Henry sat at the table, his coffee untouched, watching her. He wanted to say something, to ask about last night, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet kitchen. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. You ever need anything? I mean, you do so much around here." She paused, her rag still in hand, and looked at him, her brown eyes wide with surprise. "Oh, Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "I'm fine. Just doing my job." But there was a flicker in her expression, a crack in her usual calm, and Henry saw it the weight she carried, the exhaustion she hid behind her quick hands and quiet steps. He didn't push, not then, but over the next few days, he watched her more closely, the way her fingers lingered on the worn hem of her coat, the way she'd slip a bruised apple from his fruit bowl into her bag, not for herself, he realized, but probably for someone else. He started leaving things out: extra blankets, a pair of gloves he didn't need, a bag of canned goods he claimed were about to expire. Clara never said anything, but she took them, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. One afternoon, as she was leaving, Henry handed her a thermos of coffee, still warm. "For the road," he said gruffly, avoiding her gaze. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said, and there it was again, that small, tired smile. It stayed with him long after she'd gone. Weeks passed, and Henry found himself drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. Not romantic, no, that part of his heart had died with Margaret, but something deeper, like the bond between two people who'd seen the world's rough edges and kept going anyway. He started asking her questions, small ones at first. "You like the diner on Main? They still make a mean pecan pie." She'd nod, her answers short but warm, and slowly she opened up. She told him about her daughter, Leela, who lived in Chicago, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She told him about her late husband, a truck driver who'd loved Johnny Cash and bad puns. Henry listened, his coffee growing cold, and shared a little too about Margaret's laugh, about the garden they'd tended together, now overgrown. Clara's eyes softened when he spoke, and sometimes she'd touch his arm, just a fleeting gesture, but it felt like a lifeline. One evening, as the first snow dusted the town, Henry found himself at the community center again. This time, he wasn't hiding. He'd brought a box of his own old coats, scarves, a few cans of soup he'd bought on a whim. Clara was there, same as before, handing out gloves from a thrift store bag. When she saw him, her eyes widened, then softened. "Mr. Grayson?" she said, her voice catching. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, suddenly shy, and held out the box. "Thought you could use these," he said. She stared at him, then at the box, and for a moment he thought she might cry. Instead, she took it, her hand steady now, and said, "You're a good man, Henry." It was the first time she'd used his name, and it hit him like a warm wind. Thawing something he hadn't known was frozen. That night changed everything. Henry started showing up at the community center every week, bringing whatever he could: socks, blankets, sometimes just his time. He met the others: George, a veteran with a raspy laugh; Ellen, a widow who knitted lopsided scarves; Sam, a young man with a limp and a quick smile. They weren't just strangers anymore, they were Clara's people, and now, somehow, they were his too. He and Clara worked side by side, their conversations easy now, filled with small jokes and shared silences. One night, as they sorted through donations, Clara told him why she did it. "When Lila was little," she said, her voice low, "we had nothing, lost our apartment, slept in the car for a month. A stranger left a bag of groceries on our windshield one day. No note, no name, just kindness. It kept us going." She looked at him, her eyes shining. "I promised myself I'd pay it back, one way or another." Henry nodded, his throat tight. He didn't have words, but he didn't need them. He understood.
The turning point came just before Thanksgiving. Henry was at the community center helping Clara set up tables for a potluck. The room was alive with chatter, the smell of turkey and mashed potatoes drifting from the kitchen. George was telling a story about his army days, Ellen was passing out her scarves, and Sam was teaching a kid how to fold a paper turkey. Clara was in the middle of it all, her laugh bright, her hands quick as she served plates. Henry watched her, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. Then he saw a man at the edge of the room, thin and shivering, his coat too big for his frame. He was new, hesitant, his eyes darting like he wasn't sure he belonged. Clara saw him too. She walked over, her step steady, and handed him a plate of food. "You're welcome here," she said simply, her voice carrying that same warmth she'd shown Henry all those months ago. The man took the plate, his hands trembling, and for a moment, Henry saw himself in him lost, alone, unsure if the world still had room for him. Something broke open in Henry then. He thought of Margaret, of the way she'd always seen the good in people, even when he couldn't. He thought of Clara, giving everything she had, never asking for recognition. He thought of the years he'd spent locked in his grief, letting the world pass him by, and he knew right then that he didn't want to be that man anymore. He walked over to Clara, his bad knee forgotten, and said, "I want to do more." She looked at him surprised. "More?" she asked. He nodded. "This helping, being Heret's what matters. I've got time, Clara. I've got something to give." Her smile was slow, radiant, and she squeezed his hand. "You already are, Henry," she said. "You already are." From that day on, Henry threw himself into the work. He fixed up the community center's leaky roof using skills he'd learned as a young carpenter. He drove to the thrift store, picking up donations when Clara couldn't. He even started baking lopsided pies at first, but they got better, and the folks at the center ate them up, laughing and teasing him about his crusts. He and Clara became a team, their bond unspoken but strong, built on shared coffee thermoses and late-night talks about life's small joys. The community center grew, word spreading about the little haven on Elm Street. More people came, some to give, some to take, all to belong. Henry's house, once silent, was filled with new sounds. Clara's humming as she cleaned, George's stories when he stopped by, the clink of mugs as they shared coffee. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was a home again. One crisp December evening, as snow fell outside, Henry sat at the community center, a cup of diner coffee in his hands. Clara was across the room, helping a young mother wrap a scarf around her son's neck. The boy giggled, and Clara's laugh echoed, warm and bright. Henry leaned back, his eyes tracing the room, the mismatched chairs, the flickering Christmas lights, the people who'd become his family. He thought of the night he'd followed Clara, how it had led him here, to this moment. Kindness, he realized, wasn't just the act itself. It was the ripple, the way one small gesture could pull someone out of the dark, could pull a whole community together. He'd been lost, just like that man at the potluck, but Clara's quiet care had shown him the way back. As the evening wound down, Henry raised his mug in a quiet toast. "2-second chances," he said softly, and Clara caught his eye, her smile saying everything words couldn't. The world outside was cold, but in here, it was warm, alive, full of hope, and that, Henry knew, was enough. Has kindness ever changed your life? Share your story in the comments below, we'd love to hear it. And if this story touched you, give it a like and subscribe to The Kind Story for more tales of hope and heart. Together, we can keep kindness alive. This story is a work of fiction or dramatized for entertainment purposes. While it may be inspired by real human emotions and events, all characters, names, and situations are either entirely fictional or modified for storytelling. This content fully complies with YouTube's community guidelines and is intended to inspire, not mislead.